welcome to Lifeways at Life Astrologer. And I am very pleased to say that my guest today is Sue Brain. Welcome back, Sue.
Thank you.
Well, I found that you had written this amazing article, Sex and Astrology in the AA Journal. And again, I have really highly recommend this wonderful journal for everyone. But it caught my attention because there's not that much that I've seen written on the subject. So, what prompted you to write it, Sue?
Well, I was having a conversation, as you do, with a friend, and she is having issues, let's put it this way, she's a mum of two young kids, she's got a full-time job, she's got a lovely husband, but guess what? She doesn't want to have sex at the moment. And she was saying how guilty she felt. And that really took me back to, I wrote a book called Sex, Meaning and the Menopause back in 2011 when I was going through the menopause and I was having issues with my desire, if you like, when I was going through the menopause. And it was causing issues in our marriage, obviously. But I wanted to know about what other women were feeling about this. You know, was I the only one, and was there something wrong with me? So I went off and I interviewed 80 women about of my age, menopausal age, about sex. And I then also interviewed 9 men about what it was like to be married to a menopausal woman. Well, it was a very revelatory and how this is never spoken about. Sex is never spoken about. We're expected to have sex and have desire until we're in the coffin. And all the media is about there's something wrong with you if you don't want sex. And there's just recently been an article, actually, just very recently, about what happens to you if you don't have sex. And it's this intense pressure that you have to be a sexual being. And if you're not, there's something broken in you. And I was talking to this woman, she's only in her 40s, she's in the mid 40s, and she's just got too much pressure on her, really. And so I just suddenly thought, I'm going to write about this through the eyes of being an astrologer. And that's why I wrote the article.
So, okay, you started off by talking about a particular phase in life.
Mm.
And that's not the only phase in life. And there's men and there's women and there are differences. So what is it that you're looking at in a chart to help you to understand whether the libido is up, down, whether it's up, whether the person is likely to have a strong libido or not so strong to begin with? And then what are you looking at in terms of the types of sexual experiences that a person has that are going to impact that libido for better or for worse?
God, that's a huge question, isn't it? Let's just go back to square one. Looking at people's charts, and you being an astrologer, I'm sure you'll have something to say about this. But if Mars is very prominent, and or it's in Leo or it's in Scorpio or wherever, if there's a prominent strong Mars, there's a very strong sexual urge normally this person is experiencing, and because it's in a natal chart, that will be lifelong. Doesn't have to be active all the time because Saturn can bumble along and sit on um, Mars every so often, or Pluto every so often, and that can dampen down the ardor. But I think from what I looked at different charts is that there's some people are naturally sexual, and that doesn't, you don't have to be a bloke to be naturally sexual. You are a person who's naturally sexual. And then there are the other people, let's say they're more of an air sign, or they don't have that, or they don't have a strong Mars, or Mars is maybe tempered by Saturn, or there's an opposition going on naturally in their chart. And so they may not have this strong sexual urge, and maybe sex doesn't mean anything to them. But what I did discover through the very small research thing I did in the article was just because you don't have a strong sexual libido does not mean to say you don't have a strong desire for life, and you can be highly creative, and that can give the same fulfillment as sexual gratification can. And I
That's
found that really interesting.
so you've been talking about Mars, which obviously we associate with the libido. Um, what role does Venus play in this?
Well, it's an interesting one. I don't know where your Venus is. I mean, again, I think Venus, for me, she's about the desire for love. And that's different from the desire for erotic passion or passion. That's different. And I have Venus in Aries and I have Mars in Pisces. So, as a young woman, I was quite aggressively out there. You know, that's the way I related to. I thought that love was about a battle. That's very Aries, Venus in Aries. She's a warrior woman. But when it came to it, what I wanted was gentleness and a spiritual union, which was that's a very difficult thing to get when you've got these two very different expressions of what we would call sexual energy. Other people, let's say you've got a Venus in Pisces. That's a very gentle Venus, and she wants to have a sense of merging, or I don't know, a Venus in let's say she's in Leo. She wants to be adored and worshipped. So all of us have these different expressions of Venus. Some are very sexual and some are not. I mean, Venus in Virgo is I wonder if you agree with me. There is a detachment there. There is a coolness. And I was listening to, I think it was Christopher Renstrom, I think it was talking about Venus in Virgo and how she often doesn't want marriage. She actually is quite happy being single. And I find that it doesn't mean to say all Venus and Virgos are like that. It depends on where it's in the chart and, the other aspects to her. But I found that very interesting. And, there are some sun signs that aren't as sexual as others. For example, Aquarius isn't a very sexual sign. It's full of head and ideas and idealism, and cool. Aquarius is cool emotionally. So it doesn't mean to say that you don't want sex if you're an Aquarian, but it's a cooler relationship with the libido than, let's say, a Scorpio or maybe a Taurian that just wants the body, wants that sensual body. So I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah, I think that that's right because biology is biology.
Mm,
And so there is this imperative to, if we're going to just use biological, unhuman language, the imperative to mate and to
yeah.
reproduce. So there is that. But then there is, the humanity part of it, which is very much about there's the sensual, the gratification on a sensual level,
Yeah.
and the libidinous drive, which I think you said, some it's going to be stronger in some people than others. But then there's the emotional and the connection. And I was just thinking about Venus and Virgo, and my experience of people with Venus and Virgo is wanting a pure connection. So it's seeking that purity, and it can manifest in things like a real emphasis on cleanliness and
Yes.
being attracted to people who have that sense of
Mm,
pristine,
yeah.
impeccable appearance.
Yeah, and they can actually want to make over their partner. They want to make their partner perfect, and all of that kind of stuff. So that's quite interesting. And also a Mars in Virgo. maybe more interested in looking great, the bodybuilder and all of that kind of stuff, than actually being sexually active. But if you say, I don't want sex in a group of people, you'll get what? And whether people are being truthful or not, sex is like death. People really don't, I feel so uncomfortable talking about it. And talking now as a 73-year-old woman, my sex drive has completely dried up. I'm not interested in sex, but I'm much more creative than I've ever been in my life. And that's where I get my sense of life and fecundity and what it is. It is not about sex. But again, to say that, if people just go, well, there's something wrong with you, you must want sex. No, not necessarily at all. So I think it's interesting how it plays out, and sexual desire and I really learned this when I was writing about sex meaning in the menopause, diminishes, particularly with women at menopause, particularly. They go through such huge body changes. And there was a lot of, well, I'd have sex because I don't want to lose my husband. I have sex, I tell him to pull my nightie down afterwards. There is no joy in it. Now, I'm not saying that is for everyone, 100% not. Some women carry on having great sex till the end of their life. But there's a lot of men that also start going, I don't want to do this anymore. And it's very difficult if the partners don't match. If they match, no sex means, and they still love each other, great companionship. You got your best mate there. How fabulous to grow old with. But if they don't match and one partner wants sex and the other one doesn't, it's a rupture.
So we've been talking about Venus and Mars. Have what about the houses, and particularly looking at the fifth and the eighth houses? What do you feel
Yeah.
that?
Well, it's an interesting one, isn't it? And I've just been doing a chart for somebody who's got a very heavy eighth house. And so I always look at eighth house sex as intimacy, that raw, deep intimacy that sometimes we long for. But I always think when you've got a strong eighth house, there may well be trust issues going on as well. And that how, what does intimacy mean to me? And can I trust this person to expose my soul to? I mean, that's very much the eighth house, I think. And also, you're looking at other people's resources. So, that may be very sexually stimulating for some people to go, oh, wealthy bloke, wealthy woman, that will do. Thank you very much. There's so many different layers to it. And the fifth house for me is joy and fun. So, if you've got a very strong fifth house, often it can mean children, obviously, but especially if you're a younger person, you might just have lots of lovers. Nothing wrong with that, as long as both of you are consenting. That's the other thing.
So I was wondering whether you had done any work to consider the impact on the libido or desire coming from um, actual experiences in life. So, relationship trauma, sex trauma, and whether
Yeah.
aspects were that you have looked at in this context.
That's a really interesting and profound question, isn't it? About, that you have to go back to childhood. I always look for Pluto. And normally, if Pluto is knocking around in the fourth house, there is something, I'm not saying it's sexual trauma, but there is something going on here which is uncomfortable, that's hidden. And if it's making a difficult aspect, let's say to the sun or to Mars or to Venus, it plays out in very challenging ways. And it will be acted out until it's owned in very challenging ways. So I often also look at Pluto in the 12th. That often feels like to me ancestral trauma that somebody might be carrying, and that the work is, what's mine and what isn't. What am I carrying that I really don't need to carry anymore? I am the lineage breaker. If you've got Venus, now I don't know how you've experienced this, Anna, but for me, when there's Venus in the 12th house, especially in one of the water signs, I often think that they're much more spiritually inclined than sexually inclined. There is this sense of wanting to give their heart to the collective. Whereas, let's say, a moon in Pisces on the descendant is about learning not to give yourself and sacrifice yourself to please everybody else in relationship. And that can mean sexually as well. So, I mean, it's a very interesting, if people are, willing to talk about sex, it's a fascinating reading, obviously. And I think Saturn also plays a huge part, because if Saturn sits on your Venus, I know somebody very well who Saturn sits on his Venus, and relationships have been extremely challenging. He finds it very hard to open his heart. Saturn opposite Venus, again, a difficulty in opening the heart or not trusting. I think when Saturn is knocking about opposite Venus, there are trust issues going on here. I mean, the whole heart chart has to be considered, obviously. I mean, what's your experience of that?
Yeah, I would say that's true. And I was just thinking about what you said about Venus in the 12th, because I think with Venus in the 12th, the primary relationship is with the unseen sense of God or source.
Yeah,
And there's a deep yearning for that connection.
yeah.
And I think it's very difficult to, in fact, I interviewed a lovely shamanic healer yesterday, Fatula Adrimi, and she was talking about the importance of not just connecting with spirit, but connecting with the land to be grounded. And I think with Venus in Pisces in that 12th house, or Venus in Pisces, or just Venus in the 12th house, sorry,
Yeah.
I think that yearning to connect with something outside of ourselves is very deep, and I would want to consider how to ground that more. Um, but it also made me think about sex becoming a mystical or a spiritual experience. And so
Or a Kundalini experience. Yeah.
the Lini
Yeah.
experience,
Yeah.
something about tantric,
Yeah. Yeah.
because it really needs to be more than a physical act.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
it needs to be something that is very spiritually enriching. Because if it isn't, then Venus in the 12th, it's disillusionment time, and it's
It is.
going to become a nun.
Well, and a lot of in my experience, a lot of Venuses in 12 it fantasize about being nuns. That's not unusual. And I also think it's this whole concept of ecstasy. What is ecstasy? And I think Andrew Harvey's very interesting. He's a Christian mystic talking about the whole concept of ecstasy, and that can be very sexual. It doesn't have to be, but it can be. But in my experience, also, if you have Pisces in the fourth house, there can be this, because you're standing on the oceans of consciousness, deep unconsciousness. There can also be this incredible internal yearning for God.
Yes, it's that connection with the numinous.
Yes,
I think, you were talking about people being uncomfortable, talking about death and sex. Well, I think an even bigger taboo than that is God, in our culture, because for all that, there are so many of us who are interested in that question and in exploring. Our culture itself is totally and utterly materialistic and
it is.
discourages explorations of that kind. And I think for people with a strong 12th house, this is a very big challenge, and especially when we're talking now about the sexual experience, and because I was also thinking about the how in the ancient world, in different cultures, sex was considered to be a sacred experience, and you had the high priestess,
Yeah,
the servant of Venus, Aphrodite,
yeah.
etc. And she, it was a sacred thing to be offering sex.
Mm.
So that has
Or
become
the
so,
union with God, yes,
you
or
know,
the gods, yeah.
and
Yeah.
so that
I,
is a very Venus in the 12th house
yeah.
experience. But in our society, there's no expression for that, or no outlet for that.
Absolutely none, because we have, we've obliterated the divine feminine, and she doesn't exist anymore. So, when I see a client with Venus in the 12th, I often, encourage them to think about what the divine female the feminine may mean to them. But I think going back to sex, we live in a society, as I said before, where we are expected to have sex until we die, and there's something broken or wrong with you if you don't want it. And a lot of sex therapists will consider the partner broken if one of the partners doesn't want to have sex with the partner. And it may be that their partnership has run its time and that sexual attraction that brought them together isn't there anymore. And then you do have to decide, are we going to make it through? And to be companions, life companions. And I talk to, older couples, and some of them haven't had sex for years, but they love each other. And I think we equate sex with love. When I have a friend at the moment, she is in love, which means she's having a lot of sex. And that's what she thinks love is. And I said to her, we'll have another conversation about this 6 months, a year down the line, when that's worn off a bit. And if you do like each other, if there is this immense heart connection. I mean, the big thing about sex, it brings you together. And then then it can split you apart, obviously. But it doesn't mean, sometimes it means something, and other sexual encounters mean nothing. It is a deed that's done, and there's nothing more. And that's very unfulfilling.
Yes, I'm conscious of the fact that we've been referring to this from a female perspective
Yes.
a lot, and that obviously is because we are two women talking. But I just want to remind everyone that although it's easy because we were just happened to be talking about Venus in the 12th house. And so we were talking about women, but remember that there are many men with Venus in the 12th house who will wrestle with the same issue.
Yes. Yes.
Exactly. And so, well, let's look at Mars in the 12th then.
Well, I was going to say that very thing. Well, there is, passion hidden behind the scenes. What does that mean? How does that play out? I haven't got it in the 12th house. I've got mine in the fourth. So, where's your Mars, and how does your Mars play out? But if it isn't, if it's not in a overtly fire sign, or actually water signs are quite interesting, because Mars in Cancer is a very protective person. Doesn't mean to say they're highly sexual, but they will protect the home. Mars in Leo will probably want quite a good time and maybe have more than just one partner. All of these things, again, you have to look at the whole chart and the relationship between everything else in the chart. But I think these things are very interesting. And again, I think, Mars in Virgo, they're probably more in love with their bodies than they are with somebody else. Doesn't have to say all Mars in Virgos are like that, but there is an archetype, isn't there, that plays out.
There is. So, what about, because we were talking about the body changing and how when the
Yeah.
body changes, perhaps there is a change in the appetite for the physical sexual experience. but I'm also along those lines. I'm thinking perhaps about transits and what is it that you have uncovered
Mm,
as regards
okay. All
transits?
right. Okay. I think the big one actually is the car and return for women. I'm not saying it doesn't happen for men, because of course it does, because they get their car and return at 50 as well. But I think that is hugely impactful, because it's really asking a woman to release all the crap. You need, at some point, you've got to get over mum and dad. You've got to start taking responsibility for how you want to be in the world as an older person. At the same time, you're looking in the mirror and watching your face age, and suddenly you're not being noticed as you walk in the room. All of those little subtle things that happen around about the age of 50. And yeah, I think that's one. The other very interesting phenomenon that I work a lot with women, a lot with, is the Uranus square Uranus at 63, because Uranus is asking them to say, well, how do you want to be as an older woman? And there is a lot of women around 63 that are not interested in looking after their husband. They're certainly not interested in looking after the kids anymore. They're flown the nest. And now they're going, I need to get out there and do the work I've come to do. And I find that interesting. And it's not about sex and it's not about a relationship. It's about, because Uranus is the great awakener. I'm waking up to something, but I don't know what it is. So I do a lot of work with women around then, and it's never about sex.
Hmm. Yeah, I think we go.
40-year-olds, it is. The midlife crisis. Oh boy, that can be about sex, but not at 50s, and not necessarily at 50, and certainly not at 63, even if they are having sex.
Yeah, I think really what we're talking about is the maturation
Yes.
of the not just the body, but of the psyche and of the shifting priorities with the best will in the world at 50, whether you're male or female. This is an incredibly stressful time. You may have it's possibly you may be having issues with parents who are aging or becoming conscious of their aging. You if you've got children, they may be going through those tricky teenage years.
Eight, leaving school,
Yeah, yeah, really
all of that.
difficult. And then there's work and the pressures of work
And there's the
whilst
aging process.
whilst the body is changing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think with the best will in the world, you know, joy may be, how can I put this, at a premium.
It's
It
a it's a challenging time.
it may be hard to feel joyful, and if it's hard to feel joyful, it's hard to feel desirous
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah,
In a
yes.
sense, the libido is going, and where's the energy when you're exhausted? Where's the energy? So it may look very similar in a sense to those first years of parenting as well, particularly, because
Yeah.
you're sleep deprived and you the last thing you feel like doing is
You got
having doing something that might lead to more children when you can't sleep with them because of the one that you've just had. Um, so it
and you've got night sweats. That's not attractive. It just isn't.
so there is, so we go through these phases, and I think that big transits are obviously going to be playing a part in that.
Yes.
But I wonder whether you've actually gone to the other end, to that beginning awakening of adolescence, and looked at the transits happening there, because not every child has their body changing at the same time.
Absolutely. And again, it depends on it depends on the sun sign, the moon sign, how the chart is configurated. I don't work with young children, so no, I haven't done that kind of research, but I do think somebody should, because I think it would be a very interesting thing. But the reason why I wrote this article was to say there's nothing wrong with you if you are not a sexual being. If
Well,
there's nothing wrong with you if you go off sex, it just is a state, it's just who you are, and you will express that sexuality in a different way. But you're not a broken person, and that's why I wrote the article.
and you see, that's what made me think of young people because I can remember in my adolescence the pressure that was there. And a lot of young people don't feel ready, but the pressure is there. And it's there in the media particularly. And so it that's why I was wondering whether you had looked at that.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing because talking to a lot of parents who've got teenage kids, they're not having sex, they're having what do you call it, AI sex, and they're having pornography sex, but they're not having sex with each other like we did or I did in my time, because I was child of the 70s and 80s, and we were meeting each other all over the place, and breaking out from Victorian parenting and Edwardian parenting, which was so, oh my God, that was don't have sex till you're married, and you'll be tainted for life if you do, and all of those messages that I was brought up with. And I think it's very, I don't know how young people meet each other anymore. I was reading something the other day when a young man was saying, well, I'm 22, and I'm in a class with a girl I'd like to ask out. Very normal. But he said if I did, I could be had up for harassment. This is a whole different world. I don't know. I don't know how it works for them, but I
Well,
have read a lot of very disturbing information about how how young people are addicted to pornography, and this has been going on for at least 2 decades.
well, you know, I can remember a client who described himself as a sexual predator, which worried me hugely until I discovered that the reason he classed himself as a sexual predator is because he got turned on by women.
By
Women. So a normal sexual
yeah,
urge, he had now pathologized and thought there was something wrong with him. And
yeah, it's a difficult one, that
and
one.
it got to the point where he could only express his sexuality through pornography because he saw himself as a predator if he was interested in a woman his age and believed that was objectification and it was wrong. So what can I say? Where the church left off, we have happily picked up
We have. I
again.
know, we have. But this is not what the article is about. I think we've got to be very clear about that. I wrote about how in astrology chart you can actually discover a journey with your sexuality. You can explore your journey with sexuality. That was and the fact there's nothing wrong if you're not a highly sexual being, and the fact that you can express sexuality inverted commas through, for example, creativity, or your career, or I don't know, looking after animals, or whatever your passion is. And I think we're getting into sex and psychology here, modern psychology here, which is different. I'm completely up with you with everything you're saying, and it's a tragedy that this is happening.
And I think where astrology comes in is that when we're working with our clients, we can begin to untangle a lot.
Yes.
And so it's, I think, why it was such an important article, because it opens up the door to looking at everything that we can see in terms of influences, social, parental, and how they relate to the individual's libido, and at the same time thinking about the transits that are happening, and indeed, the progress chart as well, because the progress
Yeah,
is indicative of the different phases that we go through.
absolutely.
So this is a very important topic, because it is a huge part of our humanity, and we are all very, very different. And I think that is why it was such a brilliant article to see. And I just want to thank you for that,
Oh,
for your
well, thank you so much for wanting to talk about it. It's lovely.
yes. Well, it's time that we break open taboos, I think.
Absolutely, Anna. It is time we broke open taboos.
Instead of putting and then not reawaken them, which is, I think, what's
Yeah,
sex. Yeah,
yeah.
we've broken it, and then, oh, that back in the cupboard again. Let's not talk about it anymore.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah. And I think, when we don't really talk about sex and what it means to us, we can feel very lonely with it. And there's enough loneliness going on in the world at the moment. That's another huge topic to talk about. Oh my God. Just to say, if anybody wants to read the article and isn't with the AA, I've actually put it on as a blog on my website. So if you go to my website, which is suebrain.co.uk, and go to the blog, you'll see it there. And astro.com are going to publish it too.
Brilliant. So it's lots out there. I'll be putting links to all of that in the description
Great.
box. Sue, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Anna, so much for the opportunity.
Thank you. And thank you all for watching. In the description box, you will also find links to my own websites. And in particular, the Life Astrologer website enables you to sign up for my newsletter, where you're going to find information about a myriad of different courses on astrology and also on spiritual development. Until next time, goodbye.